This pharmacy was doing millions of dollars in revenue, but this was their logo. And you would never guess how successful they were based on their looks alone. In this video, I'm going to show you how we transform this healthcare brand into a modern pharmacy brand that attracts both patients and providers. But this is not just a before and after logo breakdown, because whether you're building a brand from scratch or you have an existing business, this video was made especially for you. I'll show you how to avoid some of the most common mistakes when it comes to branding. Now, the first thing we had to figure out was the gap. Most people think that a rebrand starts with a new logo, but it doesn't. It starts with understanding what the business needs people to actually understand, not just what looks bad or good. We have to figure out what's unclear and what's making the business look weaker than what it actually is. SmartCare RX had already outgrown its previous look, but from the outside, it still felt like a smaller, earlier version of the company. And for a healthcare brand, the first impression is one of the biggest things that you need to work on. It matters so much because people are trusting you with their medication and essentially their life. So if your brand feels random, outdated, or thrown together, you are losing jobs before someone even picks up the phone to talk to you, because it creates doubt in your credibility and services. And that was the real issue here. The business was strong, but the brand just didn't show it yet. So what was actually wrong? It wasn't that the old logo just looked bad, because that's a surface level problem. The deeper problem was that it didn't work like a real brand system. It wasn't very memorable, it wasn't unique enough to separate itself from a local pharmacy, and it had effects and styling that made it feel dated. But all of those add up to a system that doesn't scale. And what do I mean by that? Well, a pharmacy brand has to work in a lot of different places. Small on a prescription label, large on a storefront, clean on a website, and it needs to be simple enough so that after someone sees it for the first time, they can remember it. And it needs to be unique enough so it doesn't get confused for any of the competitors or a generic brand. That old logo was not built for this. It felt more like a graphic instead of an identity. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to branding. They judge the logo in one perfect spot instead of asking, will this work everywhere the business needs to show up? For this brand, the answer was no. So before we started to design the new brand, we had to understand, who is this brand being designed for? And this is where a lot of business owners get their branding wrong. They start with things like, what colors do I like? What kind of logo looks cool? What style feels modern? But that is backwards. We need to understand what the pharmacy actually does for people. Because on the surface level, people will say, yeah, it's just a pharmacy. But that is not the real value. The real value is that they help people with the annoying parts of pharmacy care. Getting access to medication, figuring out cost issues, handling all the messy prior authorization that usually slows things down. And that includes customers, but also the providers and medical offices that are trying to get their patients taken care of. So the brand discovery helped us define the real job of the rebrand, not just look professional. We need to make the business easier for people to understand. And that's the lesson here. Don't start with what you want your brand to look like. Start with what the business needs people to understand faster. Now, once we understood the business, we had to define who the brand really was for. And this is where it gets way more interesting. SmartCare RX is not only speaking to patients, but also the medical providers. And these are two very different mindsets. The patient thinks, can you make this easier for me? And a provider thinks, can I trust you with my patient? So the brand has to speak to both. It needs to feel simple and helpful, but also serious and capable. And that's the balance that has to shape everything. Because if we design only for the owner's taste, then we miss the audience completely. And that is a huge branding mistake. Your brand shouldn't be built around what you personally like. It should be built around who needs to trust it. From there, the strategy became much clearer. SmartCare RX needs to feel modern, but not cold, personal, but not small, scientific, but not sterile, and trusted, but not boring. And that defined our lane. The brand had to move away from stereotypical local pharmacy, but also not too futuristic that it alienates the older clientele. So we have to keep the personal care, add credibility, and make it feel smarter, all while building a system that could scale across the whole entire business. When you figure out the strategy, the design direction becomes way easier. To make the strategy visual, we use something called a brand spectrum analysis. And this helps us get specific before we design anything, because words like modern, premium, and trusted are too vague. Modern could mean a clean tech company. Modern can mean a hospital. Modern can mean something dark and futuristic like Tron. And all of those are different things. Now for this brand, the client actually loved the look of something sci-fi and Tron related. And honestly, there was something strong there. Blue energy, clean lines, high-tech feel. But we can't just copy that vibe and call it a strategy. This was still a pharmacy, and it had to feel easy to trust. And this is where stylescaping helps. The stylescape helps us test the final direction before it gets too far into the design phase. And it gives a client something to react to, not just a vague idea of words. Because once we saw this futuristic vision come together, it became very clear that this was not the final look. There was something good there, but it needed to be pulled back. We don't want a sci-fi pharmacy, because an older clientele, and especially a conservative medical field, are going to feel that something too futuristic may feel a little bit risky. So instead, just borrow parts of it for inspiration. And that's your lesson. Inspiration is useful, but you can't let it overpower who your target audience is. So now once the direction is clear, we move into the identity. And the final mark actually pulls from a few ideas. The S and the C come from smartcare, the infinity loop for keeping customers in their ecosystem forever, and a subtle nod to DNA and science with the helix, because all of their care is custom. But the point wasn't to make the logo feel like a puzzle that someone has to decode. The point is to make a logo that feels connected and modern and ready to scale. Because SmartCare RX isn't trying to feel like a giant pharmacy. A big part of their value is actually helping people through the process. So the logo needs to balance science and care. Smart but not cold, modern but still human. And unlike the old logo, this was built to scale. It could work as a full logo, it could work as a standalone icon, it could work as small, large, light, dark, digital, or physical. That's what makes it a brand asset and not just a graphic. So our first concept was actually the final logo that they approved. And it sounds like luck, but it wasn't. And the reason why it worked was because all of the most important decisions were made up front. The brand discovery gave us the business angle, the audience gave us the filtering, and the brand spectrum gave us the personality. And we put it all together in the stylescape to give us the visual direction. So by the time we opened the actual design file, we were already done. We weren't guessing, and that's why the first concept worked. It's like going to the tailor. If they measure you first before they cut anything, then there's a chance that it's going to fit you perfectly. After that, we built the entire brand system, because most businesses don't need just a logo, and I see this all the time. Your brand needs a system. The logo has to work around your colors, your fonts, your website, your signage, any type of print or marketing materials, anything that people will see. And because of that, you need to have different logo variations. Things that will work in horizontal, things that will work in square stacks, your word mark alone, your icon, all supported by a color palette and typography. The deep navy color helps it feel trusted, the cyan makes it feel a little bit more modern, and the typography is still clean and easy to read, but has a little bit of a scientific edge. And once you start applying it through all these different applications, it starts to feel like a real business and not just a logo design update. And it finally felt like SmartCare RX had a brand that matched the actual strength of their business. Then we carried all of that throughout onto their website. But a better looking website is not just enough. It goes back to our original problem of explaining the business better. This website has to explain itself to both patients and providers. Patients need to quickly understand how deliveries are handled, refills, any type of transfers or cost supports. And medical offices and providers need to understand why SmartCare RX as a pharmacy partner is one of the better choices. Prior authorizations, specialty medications, and any type of prior authorization support. All of this structure matters. Because if someone has to dig around to find out why they should trust you, it's making their life harder and decreasing the chances that they're going to pick you. So when you're creating your site, always make sure that the value is very, very obvious and very fast to find. So the website became more than just a digital brochure, it actually became part of their whole sales and trust process. But when the client saw the final version, he was blown away, and all the fear that he had going into a rebrand completely went away. And the best proof and the best compliment that we could ask for is the fact that how much he followed through. He updated the signage, he updated the interior, he started getting branded merchandise, and he finally started using the brand everywhere because he became proud of it. Because when the owner is proud of the brand, that means everything shows up differently. The team feels it, employees feel it, customers feel it, and the brand becomes part of the company's confidence. So the main lesson is very, very simple here. A rebrand is not all about making a business look cooler. It's about matching the outside appearance to what's actually going on behind the scenes. Like I mentioned, SmartCare already had a strong business, but it just didn't show it. And because of that, they were losing out on big opportunities from other patients and medical providers. So by building this brand system, it made them easier to trust, easier to find, and easier to grow with. So if you're starting from scratch, don't start with what the business should look like. Instead, start with what the business needs people to understand. Define who the brand needs to work for, then build all the visuals around it. That's how you get a brand that works beyond a logo. This is what we do every day for our clients, and if this is something that you need help with, make sure to check out the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and like and follow for more.